History is filled with stories of great empires rising and falling. But stories of impossible survival? Those are much, much rarer. This is the tale of a kingdom and its king staring into the abyss, only to be saved by a series of events so improbable, you'd have to call them miracles. And this isn't a myth or a legend. This is the story of how Prussia, against all odds, survived the 7 Years' War, a conflict that should have wiped it right off the map. It's a story of despair, resilience, and 2 unbelievable twists of fate that changed the course of European history forever. Picture this, it's the winter of 1761. The Kingdom of Prussia is on its knees. Its king, the brilliant but battered Frederick the Great, is out of options, out of money, and almost out of soldiers. He's completely surrounded by the armies of Europe's 3 great superpowers, Austria, Russia, and France. His kingdom faces certain destruction. His enemies are closing in, his allies have bailed on him, and the total collapse of Prussia doesn't just seem likely, it seems inevitable. Frederick himself is so deep in despair that he's carrying a vial of poison, ready to take his own life. But then, in Prussia's darkest hour, history takes a turn so sharp, so utterly unexpected, it almost defies belief. So, how did Prussia get into this mess? It all goes back to the 7 Years' War. Kicking off in 1756, this was arguably the world's first true global war, with fighting that stretched from the forests of North America to the plains of India, and most importantly, across the heart of Europe. At the center of it all was a bitter rivalry between the old guard, Austria, ruled by the formidable Empress Maria Theresa, and the upstart Kingdom of Prussia, led by the military genius, King Frederick II, better known as Frederick the Great. Years earlier, Frederick had snatched the rich province of Silesia from Austria, and Maria Theresa was determined to get it back. This grudge pulled the entire continent into a tangled web of alliances. Austria, desperate to crush its northern rival, teamed up with its traditional enemy, France, and the massive Russian Empire. This diplomatic shake-up was stunning. Suddenly, Little Prussia, whose British allies were busy fighting France over in the colonies, was facing a coalition of giants. Frederick, who was never one to sit around and wait, launched a preemptive strike into Saxony in 1756. In the first few years of the war, his genius was on full display. Using new tactics like the oblique order of battle, he won a series of incredible victories against armies that vastly outnumbered his. At Rossbach and Leuthen in 1757, he outmaneuvered and shattered French and Austrian forces, cementing his reputation as the greatest commander of his age. But even a genius can't defy basic math forever. The war became a brutal, grinding war of attrition, a war Prussia simply could not win. The coalition's supply of soldiers and money seemed endless, while Prussia's was shrinking by the day. For every victory Frederick pulled off, the Allies could just raise another army. By 1759, the once unstoppable Prussian army was a shadow of its former self, filled with raw recruits and exhausted veterans. The kingdom was bleeding out, and the tide was turning against the House of Brandenburg. That brings us to the summer of 1759, and Prussia's first brush with total annihilation. On August 12, near a village called Kunersdorf, Frederick's army of 50,000 men clashed with a combined Austro-Russian force of around 80,000. The battle that followed was the single greatest disaster of his entire career. At first, the Prussians were making progress, but Frederick, hungry for one final, decisive victory, pushed his exhausted troops too far. The famously tough Russian soldiers held their ground. A final, desperate Prussian cavalry charge was completely torn apart by Russian artillery. The Prussian army didn't just lose, it disintegrated. By the end of the day, the Prussians had suffered catastrophic losses, around 18,000 to 20,000 killed, wounded, or captured out of roughly 50,000 men. He lost most of his artillery. When the dust settled, he still had about 30,000 men left, though the army was badly shaken and disorganized. Frederick was absolutely broken. In a letter he wrote that night, he gave up command of the army, writing, "I think everything is lost. I will not survive the doom of my fatherland. Farewell forever." He was convinced the war was over and Prussia was finished. And honestly, it should have been. The road to Berlin, Prussia's capital, was wide open. The victorious Allies began to advance. Frederick somehow scraped together 33,000 men to make a last stand, saying they would fight more in order to die beneath the walls of our own city than through any hope of beating them. But then, the impossible happened. Or rather, nothing happened. The victorious Allies just stopped. The Russian and Austrian commanders had also taken heavy losses at Kunersdorf, and their supply lines were stretched thin. More importantly, they didn't trust each other, and that mistrust prevented them from coordinating a final, killer blow. To Frederick's complete astonishment, they just turned around and withdrew their forces without ever attacking Berlin. The capital was saved. The kingdom was saved. Frederick, ever the dramatist, called this bizarre turn of events the first miracle of the House of Brandenburg. It wasn't an act of God, but a stroke of incredible luck born from his enemies' exhaustion, caution, and infighting. It gave Prussia a chance to breathe, regroup, and somehow continue a fight that should have ended right there. That first miracle bought Frederick time, but that's all it bought. The next 2 years were just a continuation of the same bloody, grinding war. Prussia was still in the fight, but it was being slowly choked to death. By the winter of 1761, the situation was even worse than it had been after Kunersdorf. The kingdom was bankrupt. The army was down to just over 100,000 men, many of them poorly trained, facing the combined might of 3 empires. Frederick himself wrote that, "My every bale of hay, sack of money or batch of recruits only arriving by courtesy of the enemy or from his negligence." The Russians captured the vital port of Kolberg in December 1761, giving them a strong foothold for the coming campaign season. The Austrians held key fortresses in Silesia. The French were still in the west. Prussia was completely boxed in. To make matters worse, Frederick's only real ally, Great Britain, got tired of funding the war and threatened to cut him off. Frederick was isolated, exhausted, and completely cornered. He saw no way out. Defeat seemed not a matter of if, but when. The entire legacy of his family, the House of Brandenburg, was about to be destroyed. This was the absolute lowest point. The kingdom was on the brink, and this time, it really seemed like no miracle was coming to save them. And then, on January 5, 1762, the impossible happened. Again, this miracle didn't happen on a battlefield, but in a palace in St. Petersburg. Empress Elizabeth of Russia, Frederick's most powerful and determined enemy, died. Elizabeth had a deep, personal hatred for Frederick the Great. She saw him as a dangerous upstart and was the engine driving Russia's war effort. Her death, at the very moment when a total victory was in her grasp, was an unbelievable stroke of luck for Prussia. But what happened next was even crazier. Elizabeth's successor was her nephew, Peter III. Peter was not a fan of Russia. He hated the culture, the church, and the military he was now supposed to lead. His real passion, his obsession, was Frederick the Great. He was a royal superfan. He idolized the Prussian king, played with toy soldiers in Prussian uniforms, and saw Frederick as the perfect monarch. The consequences of this fanboy taking the Russian throne were immediate and world-altering. Peter didn't just end the war, he completely flipped Russia's foreign policy on its head. He immediately ordered a ceasefire. Then, he signed a peace treaty, agreeing to give back all the territory Russia had conquered from Prussia, including strategic East Prussia, without asking for a single thing in return. And he didn't stop there. He then signed an alliance with his hero, Frederick. Russia, which just weeks before had been Prussia's deadliest enemy, was now officially at peace with Prussia and even entered into a defensive alliance. A small detachment of Russian troops, under General Chernyshев, briefly cooperated with Frederick's forces against Austria, though this was limited and short-lived. The news was so stunning it was hard to believe. The anti-Prussian coalition, which had been seconds away from victory, instantly fell apart. Austria, now left all alone, was suddenly facing a revitalized Prussia reinforced with Russian troops. For Frederick, it was a deliverance so profound, so far beyond the realm of possibility, that he could only call it the second miracle of the House of Brandenburg. It was a true deus ex machina. where the random chance of royal succession completely rewrote the reality of a continent-spanning war. Re-energized by this unbelievable turn of events, Frederick wasted no time. With Russia no longer a threat, he could focus all his forces on the Austrians. He went on the attack. With the help of his new Russian allies, he drove the Austrians back, winning the Battle of Kunersdorf and recapturing the critical fortress of Schweidnitz. The province of Silesia, the prize that had started the whole war, was safe. But history had one last curveball to throw. Back in Russia, Peter III's reign was a complete disaster. His open contempt for all things Russian and his deeply unpopular decision to abandon a war Russia had practically won had infuriated the entire country. His hero worship of Frederick was seen as a national humiliation. After just 6 months on the throne, he was overthrown in a coup led by his own German-born wife, who was proclaimed Empress Catherine II, later known as Catherine the Great. A few days later, Peter was dead, likely murdered by his wife's supporters. For Frederick, this must have been terrifying. The miracle that saved him was entirely due to Peter's personal obsession. Would Catherine, who had just overthrown her Prussophile husband, flip Russia's policy again? Would those Russian troops turn on him? But Catherine was a pragmatist. She knew her husband's policies were unpopular, but she also knew Russia was exhausted from 7 long years of war. While she immediately pulled the Russian troops from Frederick's command, she made a critical decision: she did not re-enter the war against him. The peace between Prussia and Russia held. Austria was left to face Prussia alone. Drained of money and with no hope of winning one-on-one, Maria Theresa finally had no choice but to sue for peace. On February 15, 1763, Prussia and Austria signed the Treaty of Hubertusburg. The terms were astonishingly simple: everything went back to the way it was before the war. After 7 years of bloodshed that had killed hundreds of thousands and brought his kingdom to the very edge of extinction, Frederick the Great had won. He kept Silesia. The miracles of the House of Brandenburg ensured Prussia's survival and cemented its place as a major European power. Frederick's reputation grew to legendary status. He was not just a military genius, but a king who seemed to have fate itself on his side. His incredible resilience, combined with 2 jaw-dropping strokes of luck, ensured his kingdom would not only survive but would one day become the core of a unified Germany. So what are we to make of these miracles? Were they divine intervention, as a grateful Frederick claimed? Or were they just a powerful example of the role that pure chance and the personalities of a few key people can play in history? The hesitation of a few tired generals, the timely death of a bitter empress, and the fanatical admiration of her successor, these were the threads that wove Prussia's salvation. It's a powerful reminder that history isn't a straight line. It's a chaotic, unpredictable story, where the fate of nations can turn in an instant on events so unlikely, you can only call them miracles. The story of Frederick the Great is one of the most dramatic in all of European history. If you ever find yourself in Germany, you have to check out the House of Brandenburg-Prussian history in Potsdam. It's located in a beautiful old building that was once the royal horse stables for Frederick's court. The museum covers 900 years of the region's history, with incredible exhibits that really bring this era to life. You can see everything from priceless artifacts to interactive models, all inside a stunning historic setting. It's a fantastic visit for anyone fascinated by this period. What do you think? Was Prussia's survival a result of Frederick's genius, or just incredible luck? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next trip into the past. Thanks for watching.